The following content is not suitable for children.
George, we're going to talk about sexual pursuers and kind of 5 motives for sex.
I have a question before we get into it. Last time you talked about teeny tiny blowjobs. What were you talking about?
Welcome to Foreplay Radio, Couples and Sex Therapy. I'm Lori Watson, your sex therapist.
And I'm George Fallon, your couples therapist.
And we are passionate about talking about sex and helping you develop a way to talk to each other.
Our mission is to help our audience develop a healthier relationship to sex that integrates the mind, the heart, and the body.
Just as we begin, please remember to check out Uberlube. Uberlube.com is where you can get this great lubricant and help support Foreplay Radio. Well, this leads us to the first motive. The motive that we have to want to have sex is for pleasure. And you had said something about the clitoris, and I was trying to make the point that if men could think about giving oral sex like a teeny tiny blowjob, they would understand kind of better how to do it. Maybe that doesn't make as much sense, but the clitoris has a glans, just like the penis has a glans, and that's her very, very most sensitive spot. So it's kind of like a P, very sensitive there. And so when he's thinking about giving her oral sex, I mean, he kind of has to think about the structure of the clitoris. And that was the way it was described to me. A patient, his wife told him about that, and it like made all the sense in the world. And maybe it didn't make all the sense in the world in the last podcast, but kept people listening.
So you're saying he should be giving her little teeny tiny blowjobs down there. His idea of that was helpful?
Yes, very helpful. I think because he began to think about the clitoris as analogous to the penis. I think men often don't know where they are. They don't know what they're doing, and sometimes don't even know where the clitoris is, right? They don't look. And women don't show them. So definitely for better pleasure, she's got to show, he's got to look, and figure that out.
All right. I got in my data bank now, a teeny tiny blowjob. Thank you.
How many times are you going to say that in this podcast? Okay, other motive for sex. So, I tend to think that any motive for sex is positive and healthy. Anything that draws us toward our partner is good. And certainly, but sometimes it gets messed up. So there's pleasure, there's intimacy. Sometimes we have sex just to express love and feel bonded with our partner. We want to feel close. We want to feel close physically, but also intimately. There's just nothing so intimate as sex.
For my organized brain, let's give me the 5 motives, and then we can break them down.
Okay. So there's pleasure.
Okay.
Intimacy, approval, coping, and procreation.
All right. So
we
we started off talking about pleasure.
Right.
So with your pleasure, you're talking about more the physical side of sex, right? The sensations, your body being more engaged and present.
Yeah. And I think sometimes if pleasure is the only motive, maybe then
Becomes mechanical.
It becomes mechanical, right? Or not relational. And, there are people out there that maybe just in hookups, that's all they want. They just want a moment of release. They just, want to have an orgasm. They don't know or care about this partner. And for them, that's their motive. In a relationship, I think it's probably more complicated than that. But it's fine to just sometimes, right? Just say,
yes.
I
love that.
Do it.
Yeah, you're highlighting there are different types of sex and different times when we might emphasize one of these more than others. But as I really want to invite our listeners to think about these 5 motives and think about how important are each of these to you. And if some are not, how do you find ways of bringing more of that? Because I think the more range you have with these 5, the more vitality you're going to have in your sex life.
People just want us to go back and talk about the teeny tiny
right.
job. I think it's all of it.
Before we move away from pleasure, right? That idea of it being not just about the orgasm, right? That's part of the pleasure, but just having your body more engaged, the different types of touch, sensual, erotic. There's so many different ways of really kind of increasing our range of kind of pleasurable activities in sex. If you think about pre-sex, the foreplay, sex itself, after sex, the afterglow, I mean, there's just so much pleasure that we could actually really think about and find ways of bringing more of that. I'd love in another podcast, Lori, to do like a real thorough way of assessing these different motives and how we could kind of find ways of introducing more of it into our love lives.
All of it, all the skin on skin contact, just the naked skin to naked skin, warmth, all of that releases oxytocin too, which makes us feel connected to our partner. Pleasure is a great motive for sex. But I think what you're expanding is it doesn't just have to end in orgasm. There's stroking and touching and lying together and things that are all good and bring a sense
playing
of pleasure.
And laughing and intimacy.
Intimacy, expressing love, closeness, something that I'm only doing with my partner. It's kind of the secret world that only he and I share.
So that's around professing love, the importance of your emotional bond, feeling safe, feeling this might feel spiritual for people, being part of something bigger than themselves.
Absolutely.
Right? So often great lovers talk about this vulnerability, this sense of kind of deep connection, how important this really is to sex.
And I think that sometimes, especially in a female body, if you're not driven as much by hormones, the desire to make love to your partner does come from this desire for connection and intimacy. And I think men are driven more by hormones and what their body feels. So they have the edge on being motivated for pleasure. And sometimes they express disappointment. Well, she just wants to do it because she loves me. She just wants to do it because I'll feel good or something. And I'm like, anything to me that she's starting out of a place of love is a gift, especially knowing that her body will probably catch up.
It makes sense why men want their partners to start with mutual desire, but that's not always super realistic. And that willingness to just engage, even if you're not, that really is a true sign of love, that you're hoping your body's going to kind of get warmed up after but starting off saying, hey, I'm willing to do this is a gift.
And I think that therapists often want to talk about intimacy as the end result of sex, that this is the goal of sex, and it is certainly, but the research really shows that in secure attachment, pleasure and intimacy are kind of the two main motives that draw people together and fuel the sexual cycle. So it's important, yes, that it
the sexual positive cycle.
The sexual positive cycle.
Okay. Right. So as you're thinking about your relationship, maybe you focus more on the pleasure part of it. Then how do you bring more of this emotional engagement, this awareness of the intimacy? Or maybe your relationship focuses a lot, does a great job with the intimacy and feeling safe and connected, but, is not so focused on the pleasure. Right? This is a good way of just noticing which areas you might want to lean a little further into.
Yeah. And I think that this third motive is about approval. Sometimes people have sex just to avoid a fight or rejection from their partner. I see this a lot for women when they're dating. They know that sex is important and they want to be reassured that they're attractive to their partner. So they often have lots of sex before marriage, but it's often born out of this motive, like I want to get approval, I don't want to be rejected. And then because they haven't developed the part that is pleasure oriented, then they have work to do once they get into the commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And same with men. I think sometimes for them, pleasure is easy, but they haven't necessarily developed the part that is intimate, that is reassuring to their partner and creates an emotional bond. So it's not a bad thing. I mean, sometimes, right, having sex just to avoid a fight or, just because you're feeling a little anxious about the relationship, it works.
It's so important just to normalize that this is a motive for a lot of people. I mean, there are a lot of male withdrawers who feel pressure, right? They're pursuing partner wants more, and they're really doing it out of approval too.
They are.
Right? They know it makes them feel closer afterwards. It takes pressure off. So they just want to kind of get it right. And, that this is a form of motivation.
And I think that even sexual pursuers have sex for approval means. Like sometimes when the cycle gets out of whack, they're motivated to have sex to prove connection. And so it's not even about pleasure. It's not about intimacy. It's like, can I know that there's enough supply? Can I know that you love me enough to do this? I'm not saying it well. I don't think George helped me. But it's like a frenetic quality to it when they are all about having sex just to get approval from their partner, that they're good lovers, that they're desirable, that they're attractive.
I think there's a little bit of a negative connotation to this, and I just want to balance it out that, this need for approval is also how, when it's working, you're going to feel confident about yourself, right? You're going to feel chosen. You're going to feel safer. So it's that's what the motivation's looking for. It's like saying, if I have sex, afterwards, the world's going to be a better place for me. I'm going to like myself better. I'm going to feel chosen. I'm going to like my partner more, right? So that kind of motivation, what it's looking for, I think is really healthy.
I agree. All of our motivations work when things are cooking. So we're talking about 3 motives: pleasure, and intimacy, and the desire for approval. And let's come back from the break and talk about coping and procreation. We are grateful to Uberlube for still sponsoring us. This is a fantastic lube. If you haven't tried it yet, please check it out at uberlube.com with the coupon Foreplay, which gives you 10% off. I keep forgetting to tell people that. They can support us and they can try this great lubrication, which is really, it's made out of a high-grade silicone. And, I do all kinds of ratings on lubrications just in my work. And silicone doesn't get absorbed into the body, so it really provides smooth touch, smooth intercourse, a great glide. It's scent-free. It is taste-free, so you can switch from foreplay to oral sex to intercourse with no problem.
Well, if you're using Uberlube to enhance and relax your body, then it's just that much easier to open up your mind and expand your heart.
And having something fun that makes sex even better, I would love for you to try Uberlube.
Support the Foreplay podcast and save 10% off your order when you use the coupon code Foreplay at uberlube.com.
We've done 2 Facebook Lives for our patrons, George, and we try to do that once a quarter. We try to send newsletters and give exclusive material. But it's really, we are grateful for people who believe in our mission to help couples keep it hot and help inform people and help them talk about sex, help them get better at their sexual relationship.
Right. And partnering with us it's really an honor to know people are joining us on this mission, that this is an effort to produce and for the listeners to put aside time, and we hope that's valuable. But when we join forces, it's just a lot easier to get that message out there. So we so appreciate the support, both financial and just to make those ratings and to spread the word, because our world really needs it.
It does. And we get so many letters from people, not just patrons, that are grateful for what we're doing and say it's changing their lives. And so if you want to help us change the world, we would appreciate that support. And certainly this is something that our hearts are in and we've given a lot to, and you can join with us.
So Lori, number 4 on our list of motives, procreation. We wouldn't be here as a species if that also wasn't part of the game. The need to produce babies and offspring to continue our species.
Oftentimes, high motivation to have sex, even if the sex is not that great, sometimes during infertility issues. But, sometimes people don't struggle with infertility. They just decide, right, let's make a baby. And they have lots of lovely sex. And it's wonderful.
Right. So if that's one of your motives, that's a healthy endeavor. All right. Anything else you want to say about procreation? We could spend a whole podcast on the problems that they can create when there's too much pressure and it's not working and you start throwing miscarriages in. And, there's a whole lot here that brings layers of complexity.
Yeah.
Right. But just to kind of highlight, the good intentions behind.
I will just say, I know when 2 of my children were created.
Really?
Yeah.
How's that?
I remember the night, the sex. Like I remember the first time I was a little confused. My body was a little mixed up and I thought I was about to start my period and I was actually ovulating. And so I told my husband, let's just go for it. I'm about to start my period. And we were pregnant right away. And then second baby was, I also felt myself that there was more difficulties. I had had a miscarriage. And so the doctor had said, don't try again. And I felt myself ovulating. And we'd gone through this period of infertility. And I just looked at my husband and I said, I'm ovulating. You want to go for it? And so we did. And it both times, I like distinctly remember those sexual moments. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I think
not that my children would want to know that. Gosh, how gross, right? They don't want to know that I remember the sex that created them.
Was it fair to say that this is something that women tend to think more about? Because you are the one ovulating. You have to think about your period and the timing. And, for guys, it's something we could do a better job with to really try to understand, how that is an area to engage with, something that's on your mind a lot more often.
Yeah, maybe so. I think if I were a man, I would definitely track my wife's period, like having a calendar. That would just be smart. But I mean, yeah, I think my husband knows those moments too, because he knew we were trying. I don't know if he remembers the sex as well as I do, though.
So it's not such a good strategy to get surprised and frustrated every time your partner's period comes?
That is not such a great strategy.
All right. Write a note down with this one too. Okay, keep going.
George getting benefits from doing the podcast. Track. There's an app now, George, on your phone.
Really?
Yeah, you can just put in the period and then it tracks it for you. Pretty soon it'll predict it for you. So you should do that.
All right.
Yeah. Day before the period too. A lot of women really horny, just for the record. So take advantage of that, man.
Well, I appreciate folding this one into the motives because it is an important part of the process that probably doesn't get a lot of the conversation unless you're trying to have a child, right? Mm-hmm. But even when you're not trying to have a child, it's still it's in the background there, right? It might be a concern, a fear, a caution, something that it would be helpful if we talk about.
That's so true.
All right. True. Last one.
Coping.
All right.
Yeah, so people have sex because they feel stressed out. They want to escape their day. They want to have some good ending to a terrible day, right? I mean, if you have sex after a bad day, good day.
All right.
Yeah. And it's fine. I think it becomes problematic when you're using sex that way frequently and your partner's not on board with it. Like, oh, you just want to have sex so that you can go to sleep. I hear that one a lot.
Right.
I'm like,
well,
right.
I like
right.
It's really important to normalize that this is a motivation. You're not wrong or bad because you want to have a quickie and fall asleep. I get the problematic if that becomes the norm, but that just to give permission to everyone out there that if your body feels that, like a little orgasm right now would really feel great to go to sleep, that's a healthy motivation to have.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, so many people love that. Orgasm in a nap, that's beautiful. Or just to take yourself out of, whatever kind of frustration it has been, a day with the children, like suddenly you get to be a woman instead of just a mother. Somehow or another, escaping the stress is a great motivation for sex.
Right. And you can see if that becomes the norm, why that creates problems, because it's really focused on the release. And there's really not a lot of time in that for the emotional connection, for the intimacy.
But all kinds of sex. You know, in a long-term relationship, we're going to have all kinds of sex. Like you said before, last podcast, 1 in 10 is not going to be great. So what? As long as you have 10. and most of it is good. Maybe it's just okay to. I think relieving stress is a great motive for sex.
Yeah. See the big smile on Lori's face as she says that.
Going to sleep, man. Works for me.
Well,
I get
even
it.
that, I find that helpful. If I'm just taking 10 sexual encounters and one's going to be problematic and maybe not end so great, maybe another 2 or 3 are going to just be stress relievers. Then another 2 or 3 are going to be really focused on the emotional bond and the really that affection and attention and foreplay to really kind of make us, and then who knows, maybe the other 2 are just some kind of focus on pleasure, erotic, or something differently. But just to listeners to come up with a plan in your head, like how do you mix things up? And it's okay if you want all 9 to be one way. Does that work for your partner?
Mm-hmm.
Again, how do we have these conversations that try to get people as much in sync as possible?
Yeah, I think the issue with coping and stress maybe if it's male and he wants a quickie because he has to get to sleep or he's too stressed out, she's probably not going to get what she needs. But she could use a vibrator,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be fast for both of them. Like, I think about a lot of couples would be very happy if they had Tuesday night quickie sex and Saturday morning long, loving, wonderful sex where they take time to really feel and have pleasure and intimacy. I think if they were having sex twice a week, and I know that that's not enough for some people, but I really do not think I'd see them as clients ever.
Right.
I mean, the majority of people, if they had at least that much, they could get by.
Yeah, I saw a stat that the average frequency is 6 to 7 times a month.
Mm-hmm. So that's 1.5 times a week.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is a slight decline in frequency as we get older, but there's an increase in satisfaction.
Do not give me the bad news.
Listen, no, but you missed the second part of this.
Okay.
With the slight decline in frequency, there's an increase in satisfaction.
That's good.
That goes against the myth that it's all this hot young sex, that actually old people are having the best sex.
That's right.
Right? Because they are incorporating more of these 5 motives that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Right? They're being more emotionally engaged. I like to simplify it by saying what we so often repeat on this podcast. It's about the brain, the body, and the heart. Mm-hmm. Right? How do we make room for all 3 of them to show up during sex? Right? It seems like older couples are doing a better job of bringing their heart in, focusing on their emotional connection. They're more aware of their bodies, the importance of it be more than just their genital, right? They got to focus on everything and bringing in that mind. How could they bring in fantasy, eroticism, whatever?
That's good. I like that. So heart, brain, and body, George. So the heart would be the intimate expression of love that sex gives us. So the body would be pleasure and coping. We release stress, we feel pleasure. And the brain. So the brain is really the approval one. Mm-hmm. And the body, of course, procreation too, I guess. But the approval is something's going on in our mind that we want to resolve, some conflict about connection, something that we are needing for security, something that, will make us feel better about the relationship. That might be the mind.
And I also think about it, maybe we're going outside the box a little bit here, but that whole need for mystery and novelty and different positions and fantasy, right? That just raises the levels of engagement in a relationship. And I think for a lot of couples, that's part of the motive, what they're looking for. What they're going to get from that is more pleasure. They're going to get more of a connection. Right? But we really want to find ways of engaging our brain in this process.
I also think what you said, mystery and eroticism and novelty, that's also intimate, right? Because it's sharing myself with my partner. I mean, we have to be really brave to let them into the things that we think about that are mysterious to us, or maybe having a part that enlivens us that we just share the live part with our partner.
Right. I found it really helpful, Lori, just to zoom out and try to see a broad perspective of different motives around sex. And we don't have to force people into boxes. You can do your heart, your brain, your body, this need for intimacy, pleasure, relieving stress. The whole idea is to explore, to get curious. Which ones are really important and you really do a good job of, which ones might be really important to your partner that maybe you don't do such a great job of. And how do you find the areas to continue to explore and grow?
And where is your cutting edge? Which one do you need kind of the work on? Is it expressing more intimacy or growing in your own body's pleasure and understanding your own body, or what would make it better?
What would make it better is a great question.
Okay. Thanks for listening to Foreplay Radio.
Keep it hot and keep exploring.
And P.S., please tune in to our Patreon page so that you can catch the next exclusive episode and our next Facebook Live.
We appreciate you joining us to spread this really important message.
Call in your questions to the Foreplay question voicemail. Dial 833-MY-4PLAY. That's 833-4-PLAY. And we'll use the questions for our mailbag episodes. All content is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for therapy by a licensed clinician or as medical advice from a doctor.